I remember I lost all will of living. I lost all will. Every shot that I would shoot in my head, I was hoping that it was the last. I remember sitting there, I would cry and I would cry and I would cry and I would cry about my kids, man. I just wanted my kids back. And I remember I would remember sitting there just listening to music, man, just crying out to God, asking God, just please let me have my kids back. God, give me some type of purpose in my life. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Buchanan. I'm a recovering addict since August 16th, 2017. I'm a counselor for Another Chance Ministry / Full Circle in partnership with them from the west side of Columbus. And my sin, the things that I was consumed in, took me to the lowest, darkest places that isn't even fathomable to the human mind. I used to do things that is just unimaginable. The depth of my soul that I lost in the pit of addiction is just, I can't even describe it. I lost connection with God. I lost connection with my kids. I lost connection to everybody around me. I would walk into a room, everybody would leave me. I've always known God my whole life. My mom introduced me to Jesus when I was 6 years old, and she told me Jesus was in my heart, and I took that and I ran with it for my whole life. And so I always knew something in me was different, that the God in me was always in me. And that very thing is what drove me away, from a purpose that I knew I had, the feeling and compassion that I had for people. And I believe that's why my addiction got so bad, is because I did know Jesus. I did know who God was. So in those moments in my life, the depth of despair that I had created something in me that all I could describe it as is a monster. 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago, I cried out to God one day, and I just asked him, God, either help me or kill me. Please take me to a different place than this, because I can't take it no more. Today, I have a beautiful wife. I'm remarried. I have all 6 kids in my life. I work as a counselor, giving back to what was freely given to me. Jesus is the one thing in my life that's consistent, even when I'm not. I was hoping I could share my story with you guys today. So when I was 6 years old, like I said, I remember, I've always known Jesus. My mom told me Jesus was in my heart. And I had brothers, and my brothers would like to, as all brothers do, pick at you, pick on you and stuff like that. So I ran with this belief in my heart that Jesus was in there and that I had to protect him. And I remember running to my brothers one day, and I told them, Jesus is in my heart, Jesus is in my heart. And they hit me. And I ran to my mom and I said, Mom, they killed Jesus. And in that moment, my mom told me, she said, son, they could never kill Jesus. He's always going to live with you. Around this same time, certain traumatic things happened in my family, things in my family's life, and specifically with my mother and my father. And throughout this time in my life, I remember feeling bad for people. I remember feeling, not good enough. I remember feeling all of these things as a 6-year-old kid. My mom and dad was poor. They tried to do their best to make a way. My dad was known as an honest hustler, where we had 6 kids in the household. He did what he could to feed us. Mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she would stay and do what she had to do for the family. And some things happened that I don't want to go into at this moment, but it created division between my mom and my dad. And I remember my mom would take us to school, walk me to school every day. I've thought about this in my life, and I've took my addiction back all the way back to a chicken sandwich and a Hawaiian punch. When I was 6 years old, there was a store called Al's Market in Reeb Avenue. Reeb Elementary School was on the south end of Ohio, of Columbus. My mom would take me there every single day, and I remember it started out with, Bubby, if you go to school, I'll get you a chicken sandwich and a Hawaiian punch. If you go to school, I'll get you a chicken sandwich and a Hawaiian punch. We're walking by there, and every single day, she would get me a chicken sandwich and a Hawaiian punch on the way home from school. And on the days she didn't have it, this is why I always say my addiction started long before the drugs did, because the behavior started long before the drugs did. I learned how to perfect manipulation through my own mother, and the reason I was able to do that was because her own guilt that she had that she was carrying as a mother. And I remember on the days that I didn't get the chicken sandwich and Hawaiian punch and mom didn't have the money to get it, I would throw a fit and I would try to embarrass her. And I would strategically do these tactics in order to get these things that I wanted. And I would throw a fit and I would scream, I would cry, you know, hoping to embarrass her till she either borrowed the money or asked Al for a credit to give me this $1.09 chicken sandwich and a $1 Hawaiian punch. Growing up in my life, we was exposed to R-rated movies. We was exposed to, you know, little sex games with kids, other kids in our neighborhood and stuff like that. And developing this lifestyle of this sneakiness, you know, I was destined for addiction. Growing up to my teenage years, I remember being 13 years old, a cocky teenager, arrogant. I was angry. I was angry at all of the circumstances in my life. I was angry that I didn't have the clothes other people had. I was angry that mom and dad didn't get along the way I wanted them to. I was angry that our family wasn't as strong as it used to be. I was angry that I didn't feel good enough. I was angry that, you know, whatever. I was just consumed with anger, masking the idea or the facts of me being scared of everything. Having these insecurities that was so deep in me that I didn't realize it until later on. So growing up, from to about 13 years old, I started experimenting with alcohol. Again, neighborhood teenage girls, creating this lifestyle of sneakiness, creating this lifestyle of like drinking on weekends and anticipating the weekend during school, not wanting to go to school. All I could think about was drinking and having sex on the weekends at 13 years old. And it created something in me. It created the anticipation of instant gratification and the anticipation to escape from the pressure of life. And at 13 years old, there's not really that much pressure, but, you know, in the circumstance that I was in, you know, we barely had any food. You know, we lived on the bottoms of Columbus. You know, it was just, dad did what he could, mom did what she could. But we kind of went our own way as kids, as teenagers, and it developed into a lifestyle of partying. It developed into a lifestyle of sneaking out, developed into a lifestyle of doing all the things that 13-year-olds shouldn't see or be exposed to. So around 16 years old, I fell in love with my first girl. And this is when the behaviors really started. I was at West High School, and again, the drinking was ongoing. I remember those summer nights that we would, you know, I would anticipate those nights on Friday night that I would go and work for $30 a week just to buy alcohol to go to my friend's house and do things, like I said, that no teenager should do. And I got my first girlfriend when I was 16 years old, and I fell in love with her, and I treated her badly. I remember the insecurities took me over even at 16 years old. I would skip school and I would go to her house. I would try to control every aspect of her life. I would try to control everything that she'd did. And it was probably stemming from the things with my mom and my dad. That's no excuse. But I'm looking back on it now, and that's what I realized is that all of these things that was instilled in me was instilled from generational curses, family situations, family behaviors. All of these things was a learned behavior that I took upon myself to do and practice. I was 16, I was insecure, I was full of hormones, and I would constantly drink and get into trouble. I dropped out of school at 16 in 9th grade, and I started working doing roofs. At that time, I was making more money than my dad was, and I remember my dad specifically saying that. And I remember the pride welling up in me, and I used that as a justification to be able to drop out of school. And from that day on, my life started a downward spiral of like, you know, not committing to anything. And see, the thing about quitting is you do it once the first time and it's hard on you. You grieve like, man, why did I do that? Why did I quit that? And it starts to become easier, and then it develops into a habit. You learn to justify all of the things that you put the lack of effort into. And that's what was happening with me. Well, I remember my dad began to get sick. I was 17 years old. We moved to a place called Wedgwood. Mom and dad lost their house. Dad lost his job. He couldn't work anymore. His legs was getting bad. He was 6'2", 375 pounds. We moved to this place called Wedgwood, and I got with this other girl. I ain't gonna say her name. And 11 of us, 10 of us was living in this little apartment. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. I remember the smell of the chicken cooking in my mom's kitchen. I remember the look on people's faces. I remember the sound of the football game that was playing in the background. I remember all of these things that was going on, and I could describe it in vivid detail. While I'm laying in my room with my girlfriend at that time, again, these controlling behaviors evolved. And now I'm 17 years old, even more cockier, even more dangerous, even more unwilling to listen to anybody, thinking that I could just get away with anything. And I remember laying in that room, and I started fighting. Me and my girlfriend started fighting. And there was screams, like she was screaming at me, I was screaming at her, and wrestling around, whatever it led to. And I remember my dad busting through the door, and at this time he's starting to get really bad off. And I remember him busting through the door like, "Let her go." And I'm like, "No, I'm not doing it." And he said, "You're not going to go to prison like your brother." Me being a cocky teenager, I ignored him and I told him, "F you." About that time, my dad swung at me and I ducked. And he fell in his leg. And I remember, all I can remember was the sound that he made. I've never seen my dad in pain before at that moment. I've never seen my dad hurt. I've never seen my dad. My dad was Superman. He was invincible. I remember that moment. All I remember is the sound of his voice when he let out the air of his body when he hit his leg on the ground. My dad was shot when he was 21 years old, and they didn't remove all of the buckshots in his leg. And when my dad hit his leg, the buckshot jarred loose and got into his main artery, and it busted his heart. I remember me instantly trying to get my dad up, and I remember the last words, I helped him get up, and I walked into the living room with him, and he sat down, and he was like, "Son, just listen to me, please." And about the time he said, "I love," his head fell back and his tongue fell out of his mouth. It took 6 firefighters that day to get my dad out of that apartment building. He never made it out. He died in the hospital. I ended up blaming myself. For a long time. I just know the last words that he was going to say was, "Son, I love you." And I didn't get to hear him. I didn't get to hear him say those words. So all I was left with was guilt, shame, and blame. That Superman was gone and I had to be a man in this scary world, not having nothing. And once my dad died, fear overtook me. That summer in Wedgwood, I remember I was introduced to cocaine. The drinking started getting heavier. I was on a sex run, sleeping with everybody that I could, trying to hide and cover this pain, mask this pain. Around the same time, I was still with the same girl, and I hit her. I was mentally abusive to her. I'm 17 years old. I was mentally abusive to her. I was emotionally abusive to her. I wasn't a good person at all. She ended up leaving me, and I ended up moving to Dayton with my mom after she moved, after my dad passed away. And I was desperate for about a year of like searching for love or whatever you want to call it. And the ongoing behaviors persisted and continued drinking and all of these things that kept going. Out even dating, even when I didn't even know anybody, I still continued to do these behaviors. One day I got an email. It was back when the emails first came, and it was her wanting to come back to me. I don't know why. I can't even tell you. We ended up having 2 kids. I moved to Dayton with her. I had 2 kids. We got our own place. And my drug addiction didn't start right away. So even at that time, I had a little stability in my life because after my dad died, it was her stepdad that showed me how to be a man, that showed me all of the construction, like everything about construction, showed me what morals, what values, what everything looked like. It was a normal family. Well, somewhere along the way, they didn't know that I was drinking the whole time. I would drive from Dayton to Columbus just to get a 24 pack because I was too young to buy it in Dayton. Two 24 packs, and I would drink it in a weekend. And the cycle continued, it increased. And I would find myself coming home from work every single day, crying my eyes out, looking forward to going home and drinking and crying. Just crying because being sober, I didn't have the courage to express myself. I didn't have the courage to express my emotions. And I would just remember crying. I would listen to songs about my dad and I would cry. Eventually my addiction progressed. I started doing cocaine again, and it got bad and worse and worse and worse. I would drive back and forth from city to city, doing cocaine, bringing cocaine home, cheating on my ex-wife, doing all of these things that no man should have been doing, that should have been home taking care of his kids. At that time, I was a good dad, but I was emotionally neglectful of my wife and my kids. It progressed for the next few years. I got my own place with her, our own place, and we lived in Miamisburg. And by this time, I was introduced to opiates, and I started taking pain pills. And 1 led to 2, 2 led to 5, 5 led to 10, 10 led to 15 a day. And somewhere along the way, that stopped working. It wouldn't work no more. Didn't mask the pain enough, or whatever the reason. So I started mixing the pain pills with Xanaxes. I would black out. I would drink. I would go places driving. I would drive drunk on Xanaxes, waking up not remembering, in jail, doing all of these things that I didn't even remember. I was mean to her, again, mentally abusive, emotionally abusive. It got so bad where she finally just said she had enough and she kicked me out. So I moved back down to my mom's in Columbus. At this time, all of her kids was back in her house. We're all grown-ups in a house on Eureka, and here I am, lonely because of my actions, lonely because of my addiction, lonely because of my behaviors, and in self-pity, thinking that everybody else was the reason why where I was at. It was everybody else's fault why my wife left me. It was everybody else's fault why I was in the position I was in. It was everybody else's fault why I felt the way I felt. And I remember one day I got a knock on the door, and it was divorce papers. It was a sheriff with the divorce papers. And my wife was serious at that time, and I didn't believe it. I guess there was always this hope of, like, she's going to call me back. And she would divorce me at that time. About the same time, I met another girl. I had 2 kids with my previous wife. In the beginning, she allowed the kids to come back around, come down to my mom's, visit with me and things like that. Eventually, somewhere along the line, that stopped. My addiction got deeper. My alcohol addiction, pill addiction, cocaine addiction. At this time, I was doing opiates, cocaine, and alcohol, Xanaxes, all of these things. Nothing too harsh yet. It started to progress. And over the years, 2-3 years, I had another 2 kids. I welcomed my first son. And by this time, it led to Perk 30s. I was on Percocet 30s, and I was doing 1 to 2, 3 a day, 4 to 5 a day. I would scrap, going and buying 5 Perk 30s a day just to do. Eventually that stopped working, so I had to start mixing them with Klonopin, Xanaxes, things like that. And old behaviors, old patterns surfaced once again, and I started treating the girl, my new girlfriend, the same way I did with my ex-wife. Now, having 2 kids, this one particular story that I'm going to share eventually is one of the starting points of me changing. But as my addiction continued to progress, you know, the abuse, the mental abuse, the physical abuse, all of the things that I did to my ex-wife, I was doing to this girl now. And living in 11 people, 12 people in a abandoned house with my mother. My mom living like an addict, but never did drugs at all. She would give us every dollar that she had. We would go to her, we would take her last bit of food, take her last dime. We would stage fights, we would stage arguments, we would do all of that just to get her last bit of money, not thinking about what mom went through, not thinking about what mom's starving. I remember walking into this house on Midland Avenue, and if anything that could signify my pain, I would say it would be 154 Midland Avenue. That would be the identification of my pain. If my pain was visible and you could see it, that would be that house. It was an abandoned house. There was no water. There was no electric. There was nothing. And we was okay living like this. We was okay living like just homeless in desperation. We was okay living like that as long as we got our fix. And I remember I was that guy that never said I would never use a needle. I was that guy that said I would never put a needle in my body. I was that guy that thought that being a heroin addict was the most lowest point that you could go in life. And I remember one day I got this stuff called China White, and it was just like a pill, and that's how I justified it. And I started snorting it, and I knew it started getting bad when I started hiding it from my girlfriend and everybody else. I would hide it from everybody. And one day I was introduced to a needle, and I started shooting up. I've never felt anything like it. I was hooked immediately. The things that I started doing for heroin, I can't even describe. And as addiction progressed, you start to lose. Anything that increases, you start to lose in addiction. So as I started out with a dime, it became a 20. And now, mind you, I had the girlfriend that needed to be well and drugs too. So anything that we had, we split. So I would scrap, I would go out, and I would always make sure I had a load of scrap for the next day for waking up so I wouldn't be sick. And eventually my car got towed, and I was left with trying to be creative and learning how to do without access and to be able to still sustain my addiction. And I'd like to say that I did maintain some mental stability through it all, but I didn't. I continued to get worse, to the point to where I got this old boss, and I moved out of my mom's house three houses down, and it was just a little corner place that had 2 bedrooms in it, and it was attached to a house that we was remodeling. And I remember this is when my drug habit turned into shooting cocaine, and I was hooked on cocaine so bad that I stopped. I would go dope sick in order to get cocaine. And I remember this one specific day that my son, he was 2 years old and he couldn't talk yet. And I had $30 in my pocket, and I was about to go get some cocaine. And he brought me an empty jelly jar and frantically pointed to his mouth. He was telling me he was hungry. And I acted like I didn't see it. I acted like that ain't what it meant. I justified whatever the case was, but I know what he was saying. I know he was saying that, Dad, I'm hungry. He just couldn't tell me. And that specific day, as much as I tried to deny it, I was dope sick after buying cocaine with that $30, and I was in the shower, and I was shaking, and I was puking, and I was just praying to God, and I was just asking God, please, God, if I do any more drugs, God, please put a sickness on me that I can't bear. God, please, God. And I'm just crying out to God. And I'll never forget that feeling. And it was all because of that memory that has been attached itself, and it's seared in my memory since that day. And I remember that was the start of me wanting something different, because I realized in that moment that the monster I was to choose drugs over my son, feeding my son. And I prayed to God, Lord, please, if I use any drugs anymore, put a sickness on me that I can't bear. It wasn't a sickness. I look back on my life right now, and I realize that it wasn't physical. It was misery. And I realized that in that moment, looking back, that our misery is our biggest mentor. Our torment is our biggest mentor. You think about it, torment, mentor. Besides God on earth, our biggest teacher is our torment, and the things that torment us, they mentor us to never go back to that. And that was that beginning moment for me in my start of my journey. I'd like to say that's where it ended, but that's not, because immediately I was dope sick and I went and got something, and that's once I put it in my body. I mean, within days, everybody, my girlfriend left me. She took the kids and left. My addiction got so bad that I made her do things for drugs that I don't even want to say. It got so bad that she finally had enough, and I was literally at my mom's house. I'd walk into a room, everybody would walk out of it. No one wanted to be around me. I got the idea from scrapping. At this time, my car got towed a year, like 6 months before that. And I got this idea that if I go trash picking and I can look it through all of this stuff and I can find stuff, clean it up, sell it, do whatever I had to do. I forgot to mention, during this time I had my kids, I would reason with myself that if I went and found food in the dumpster, in the school dumpsters that they threw out that day, I could buy drugs. So I would bring school dumpster food back to my family and feed them with that. This one specific day, though, I remember walking around at night. I never wanted to be out in the daylight. I was so ashamed of myself. I would jump in, dive in dumpsters looking for stuff, get it, find it, sell it, do whatever I had to do. I was just like a person that would come out at night hoping one day that somebody would make eye contact with me to make me feel like a human being again, to make me feel like I was, worth it again. I remember the looks on people's faces when they would look at me. I remember my feet dangling out of the trash can, and these kids coming by and throwing rocks at the trash can and calling me trash pickers, bums, get a job, all of these things. And I remember that it hurt so bad, but the thought of life without drugs hurt worse. So I kept going, to the point to where it eventually, I'm left alone with nothing but a made-up bed of canned green beans, a sheet, and a pillow. My mom moved out, found a different house, and she would not let me go with her. That's how bad I got. The one person in this world that never gave up on me finally gave up on me. That's when I knew it started to be serious. And I'm sitting in this house, this abandoned house, below zero weather, no access in any type of veins. I blew every vein. I used to shoot in my head, my eyes, my neck. I blew every vein. There's nothing, no access that I can get these drugs into. So I had a needle full of drugs, and my face was swelled up and hanging from the night before from a mist that I shot in my head. So I'm sitting there dope sick, shaking and puking. And I just finally threw the drugs. I threw the needle full of drugs. And I cry out to God, and I'm like, God, please help me or kill me, because I can't take anymore. God, please do what only you can do, because I can't take anymore. I've had enough. I've had my end. I'm desperate. God, please help me. The physical, mental, and emotional anguish was so unbearable that I could not take it anymore. Drugs wasn't doing it. Women wasn't doing it. I cared about nothing. I cared about my family. I didn't care about my mom. I didn't care about my kids anymore. I didn't care about anything. All I cared about was to not feel this misery that was just consuming me every single day. And I prayed that prayer, and I'd like to say it changed there again, but I didn't. It got worse. It got worse and worse and worse. And then I lost access to everybody. No more drug dealers would mess with me. My brother wouldn't give me nothing else. Nobody wanted anything to do with me. Everybody I would walk down the street. Everybody was like fighting me. It was just bad. And I remember I laid on these cans of green beans, starved to death, but I wouldn't open up a can of green beans to eat it. That's the mentality of an addict. And because it wasn't good enough, right? But I lost all will to do anything. I wouldn't even go searching dumpsters no more. I wouldn't go do anything. I was literally laying there on this bed of green beans, starving and dying slowly. Eventually, I got 2-3 days of sobriety and just staying there all day long, freezing cold with nobody around me, just nothing but my dope sickness and thoughts. And I remember my mom finally allowed me to come home one day. She said, "Come on, son." So I finally go into there. So I was doing good for a little while. And about this time, everybody's still on drugs. My family's still on drugs. And then, you get the occasional toss you a bag, occasional, somebody coming over, dropping you something off. So eventually I picked up the same habit again, and it got bad again. Well, all of the access over there was a good distance away from all the people that we knew. So anything that we could get was a great distance, 4 and 5 miles away. And I remember I lost all will of living. I lost all will. Every shot that I was shooting in my head, I was hoping that it was the last. I remember sitting, I would cry, and I would cry, and I would cry, and I would cry about my kids, man. I just wanted my kids back. And I remember I would remember sitting there just listening to the music, man, just crying out to God, asking God, just please let me have my kids back. God, give me some type of purpose in my life. Because I didn't have any. I had no purpose. I had nothing. Nobody wanted anything to do with me. Everybody hated me, and I couldn't blame them. My ex-wife got a court order, restraining order on me. I couldn't find where my other kids were, and I would just cry to God, like, God, please, please get my kids back. Just let me just see them. Give me the hope. Give me just some hope, just to see them, that I'm going to get to see them again one day. Hope was the only thing that kept me going. Hope was the only thing that outweighed the fear, outweighed the misery. Just hoping that one day, that even through all of it, my faith in God lasted from me being that 6-year-old kid. And Mom told me that He was in my heart. At this point, I've lost everything. I lost it all. I had nobody in my life. I had misery, dope, sickness, and I had a made up mind. And I remember coming into myself at this particular time. I remember I had enough, and I made my mind up. I remember laying in my mom's floor, and it was a wood floor, and her bed was like on the right side, and I remember laying there, and I had a sheet, and it was the cold floor. And the power of a made up mind is that it is the most powerful thing that you can have in your life, is when you make your mind up and you believe that you're giving up, or you're going to keep going and you're going to keep fighting. I believed in my heart that I could do it. I don't even know where it came from. I think the misery, I had 2 options, either die or keep fighting, and they both hurt. And I remember laying in this floor, and this was for a week straight, and I remember the sun coming up and the sun going down, and I remember the jerks and the cold, the internally cold feeling that I had, and the internal suffering, me facing myself for 7 days on that cold floor. I just remember every bit of aches and pains and mental anguish and emotional anguish, and my brothers coming in throwing dope on my chest, and I throw it back to them because I had enough. But I remember night after night after night, this is where I faced myself. I remember laying on that floor, and I was conscious and I was coherent to the idea and to the fact that I wasn't on drugs and I wasn't using substances at this time. And I would watch everybody come in after Mom gave them their last bit of money, and I would hear my mom. And my mom used to keep a drawer of food on the other side of her bed with just a little bit of snacks just for her to stay alive and bird feed herself, because she'd give us everything. And I remember everybody coming in every night after getting her last $5-10, like, Mom, you got any food? You got any food? And I would watch my mom go to bed hungry every single night with her stomach growling and her starving. And I remember in that moment, like, how selfish I am. And I remember all I could do was think about all of these things that I've done, all of these things. I came to myself on that floor at night, and I remember I went to treatment. It was a place called Breaking Point Recovery Center. And in this place, I was higher in there than I was on the street because they was giving me a mixture of drugs. They was giving me Suboxone on top of all these other things. I almost got in fights. I was consumed with anger. I almost got kicked out 5 or 6 different times. I was miserable still. And they almost kicked me out, and they're like, how are you high? I'm like, I'm only taking what you guys are giving me. I was higher in there than I was on the street. And well, eventually I beg them. I'm like, please don't kick me out. I got nowhere to go. If I go back to my mom's, I'm going to use again. Please don't kick me out. So they finally let me stay, and I finished. I completed. Well, the last day, they wasn't going to let me go to the 28-day program that they had because my brother and my sister was there at the time. But it was really because of my behavior. I know that now. And my case manager, in the last 5 minutes of me being there was this guy there that knew a place that in Chillicothe that was called Another Chance Ministry. And I'm like, man, it's faith-based, cool. I'm ready, God. Do it only you can. So at that time, to get Another Chance Ministry, you had to have an interview, you had to come to a church service, you had to, do all the proper, channels to get into this place. All I had was a phone call. All I had was, my case manager at the time advocating for me that, hey man, this kid, if he goes back to the streets, he's going to die. Like, can you guys give him a chance? And I remember getting on the phone and I'm just telling them how desperate I am and the things that I want to do, the things I want in my life I want to change. And I was the first ever person that they accepted over the phone here in Chillicothe at Another Chance Ministry. I began my life here. I began, started to get hope back. I started to get physical fitness back. I started to get my identity back. And after a year, after I working for so long, there was so many times in my life I wanted to give up. You won't believe how many times not having a ride saved my life. Not having a ride to Columbus, not having a ride to go to do access to what I really wanted to do, not having a ride, So if you're in treatment right now and you don't have a ride, man, it's a blessing. It's a blessing to not have access to the outside world, because access to excess will lead you to destruction. So there I am about a year in, fighting, scratching, hauling my way through. And I began becoming an RA for Another Chance Ministry. Van rides, picking people up, speaking life, all of these things. And I remember one day, I remember I would speak to people and they would listen. I'm like, what are they listening to me for? What are they? And it was only through my pain that it would interest people. And and I feel like through our pain is our biggest teacher, so we can learn from it and then we can teach. And I remember praying a prayer one day, like, God, if I have to go through this pain in order to learn to be able to teach, so be it. And I prayed that prayer, and boy, that's what happened. And so for the next couple years, the process of you're never going to see your kids back again. These are the two that I lost custody to once my second girlfriend left me. And the guardian ad litem, the lawyers, all of these people told me that I was a piece of crap drug addict. I'd never see them again. I just kept showing up. I kept showing up, even through the ridicule, even through the things that they would tell me. And I kept showing up. I would go to the children's service visits, and while the lady's sitting in the corner writing stuff, and at the expense of dignity, at the expense of embarrassment, at the expense of all that, I just wanted to see my kids. And I finally got to see them, and I just kept showing up. I finally got visitation to them. And then while I'm here, the lady that told me, that was over the case, she told me, you're never going to see your kids again. She ended up getting promoted to a higher position job outside of this guardian ad litem, the lawyer for the kids. So she didn't even think about me anymore. So they ended up assigning a new man to my case, a new person to my case. It was a Christian man. And I walk into this courtroom, and it had to be unanimous through the judge, the lawyer, and the other two people there that I would get overnight passes to see my kids. They can come stay the night with me. And all of these other people that was working with this lady hated me, and they all raised their hands in favor of me getting my kids overnight. Through all of that, started getting them back. The example that ACM, Pastor Gray, and everybody at that time set for me was incredible. The Bible says God will give you double for your trouble. And losing my dad at 17 years old, I didn't know how to be a man. I had to face the world without the courage to do so. And I hid behind drugs. I hid behind all of these things. God put Pastor Gray in my life, and I believe he gave me this not only spiritual figure, but this earthly father figure that I can learn from, that preaches sermons every single day and only uses words when necessary. He's been there. He sacrificed. He took time to invest in me, took time to speak life into me. He took time to do all of these things that nobody ever else has. And he gave me a voice. He believed in me when nobody else did. He gave me opportunities. He helped me buy my first car here. He's done so much for me here that I could never repay what Pastor Gray has done. So fast forward, I'm in the program. I get my CDCA. I start counseling people. I start doing all of these things. So I started facilitating groups. I started having a counseling sessions, a caseload for the next 6 years. I've been working here for 6 years. Today, I'm over 7 years clean. I have custody. I got full custody of my 2 kids that I lost. I have my 18 and 19-year-old oldest kids with my first wife that I didn't see for 7 years. Ended up reach out to me at, when they was like 15 and 13. We're still progressing in our relationship, but we're doing great with that. I got a great relationship with my ex-wife that, better relationship now than we ever did, as friends. Got a beautiful wife. I've had 2 more kids. I'm on my way. I'm probably 3 months away from getting my associate's degree in human services. Bought my first house in the year 2020. Everything that everybody said about me, God showed them they was wrong. If persistence, determination, willingness, and desperation is all you have, is all you need. The Bible said God is not a respecter of persons. If he can do it for me, he can do it for you. So if you're out there and you're in addiction, I remember one of the scariest things in my life was to think of my life without drugs. But if you're out there and you're in addiction, you're thinking about going to that treatment center, take that step. If you're thinking about getting out of that toxic relationship where you get beat every single day, take that step. If you're thinking about all you have in your life is to see your kids again and all you have is hope in that moment, take that step. You got to take the step, because if you don't, then all you're going to do is stay stuck in that misery. So if God is working on you, working on your heart to be able to do something different, it is possible. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. So please take it from me and take it from somebody that's been down that road. Anything is possible with God at the center. Don't live in the world. Do what you can for God, and don't seek God for what he can do for you. Seek God for who he is to you, because who he is to you is going to take you farther than what he can do for you. So I hope this helped. I hope this reached at least one person. God bless you guys.